Welcome to the WTR Small-Cap Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. Today, we're joined by Nikolas Bullwinkel, founder and CEO of Circus SE, ticker CA1 on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Circus SE is an AI robotics company developing fully autonomous food production systems in both civilian and defense sectors. Also joining is my Water Tower research colleague, James Kisner. Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Nikolas, before we jump into Circus, you previously co-founded other companies, including quick commerce company Flink, which you impressively scaled to a multi-billion euro valuation. Can you briefly walk us through your journey as an entrepreneur that led you to Circus eventually?
Sure. I mean, the short version is I've always built stuff, right? I've studied for roughly a year and then decided I might be a better one in building companies myself, and started my first company during my university studies in business, and then that shifted towards really full-time building over the course of time. Sold my first company when I was 21 years old, and after that decided that might be the thing that I want to do. The most renowned company from a consumer perspective definitely is Flink, which was the venture that I built prior to Circus. Founded that company in 2021, a good 3, 4 weeks ahead of the whole lockdown scenario and during COVID that hit the European market quite strongly. And you can imagine delivering groceries, which Flink is doing, so kind of a equivalent to a GoPuff in the US, I would say. It was quite a good timing to scale that kind of business. And what we did really with the core focus is building also the technology backbone to run these operations. And that's also a bit how the whole story around Circus evolved later. We basically scale Flink. I was responsible for building the entire software stack in the back, raised a good over 1 billion over the course of time. I exited the company at a 3 billion valuation back in 2021. And then basically directly after started what Circus is today, which is not really the same industry, but there are a lot of similarities when you think about the workers that you're attracting. And I think we always called it smart enabled labor. Like, how can we build technologies to make labor more efficient and smart in that sense, and make sure the trainings are better and so on, which we did with warehouse operations at Flink. And the whole idea emerged to do the same thing with large scale kitchen environments and everything around food at Circus. Just we took it a few steps further towards AI robotics, and kind of eliminating the entire need for human labor in that industry.
That's an awesome background. And my only digression of this podcast today, I promise, is I appreciate the comment you mentioned about starting during COVID because we launched our firm in early 2020. So I appreciate the internal or intestinal fortitude, rather, that you were required to have, as were we, to continue ahead, not knowing about the uncertainty of COVID. So moving on, for listeners new to Circus, what is the quick elevator pitch on the company's investment thesis, to include referencing what key problems your technology solves and why does the world benefit from autonomous kitchens?
Yeah. So I founded the company right now a good 4 years ago, and we really started from exploring the industry of overall food service and food operations, right? When you look at food, it's one of the biggest industries in the world, one of the largest industries in the world. Everybody needs to eat, and like we're just growing right now over 8 billion people on the planet. So there's a lot of people to feed, which requires a lot of operations in the background. And we started to dig deep into that industry, and what you see is huge inefficiencies, right? You have a ton of labor. That labor is often not really well skilled or way too expensive, which leads to a lot of food waste, overall processed foods as a base element, because that's the thing that is easier to scale and easier to run with less waste. So we really came from a technology angle to explore that $1 trillion industry, which is nearly 100% manual till today. Right? Cooking hasn't changed in the last 4, 5, 600 years, right? It's still like in Stone Age where you have a pot, you have a bit of fire and temperature, and start mixing up things. And from our perspective, that's something that is really ripe for disruption, and where AI robotics can play the perfect role to disrupt that market. And what we're doing today at the very core is we're building fully autonomous systems for that food service sector, where we're basically replacing an entire canteen through a fully autonomous system. One robot, roughly 7 square meters large, You can get a lot of information, videos, and insights from the robot in action from our website, YouTube channel at circus-group.com. So you can get a feeling of how that works. And that's the core of things, what we do today. And right now, over the past 2 years, developed a lot of solutions when it comes to AI prediction models, different software solutions, so we can really grow from our core kind of micro factory along the entire value chain and supply chain of food operations.
That's actually a very exciting business model. I'm excited to watch that scale over time. So thanks for that background, Nicholas. And I'm now going to turn it over to James Kisner to ask you a few questions.
Thanks, Tim. So I guess your key first product was called the CA1.
Yeah.
I'm hoping I can dig in a little more there, kind of double click on what the robot actually does. Like, what does a typical deployment look like in a retail or corporate environment?
Yeah. I mean, we come from an angle where we apply robotics right now to a very specific industry problem, right? So we're not trying to build the humanoid robot that can dance and play piano and walk your dog and do everything at the same time. We are more coming from an angle where robotics really serves a very specific case. And in our case, that's basically replacing canteen operations. What we're doing is we're not targeting restaurant owners. So we're not applying robotics right onto small restaurants overall, but we're targeting the other end of the spectrum, which is canteen operations and large-scale food operations, where you have a ton of cases where food needs to be offered or sold, but it's never the core business. Think about the often not that great food in a hospital, elderly care, gas stations, airports, even employee catering, hospitality, like right now hotels, for example, a lot of cases, which is not like always fine dining, right? There's a lot of hotels where it's more or less good. So you have millions and millions of locations where food needs to be served, but there's no proper chef serving it. And it's always more a mix of things. So, and that's really what we're tackling. And that's a $1 trillion market that nobody has taken a look at over the past decades. And the only peers that we see today in this market are the old-fashioned caterers. That's an Aramark, Sodexo, Compass Group, right? $1 billion companies with 500,000 people on the payroll, which is something that we don't need, and we do the whole thing through robotic solutions.
That's helpful. So what about the technology here? I mean, I'm really excited about the fact this is an AI-enabled company. Can you kind of talk about just how the software, the data, AI and robotics, all kind of work together to enable your solution? And what do you think is truly proprietary or defensible?
Yeah. So what we developed over the last 4 years on the robotics side is one system you can imagine like a small trailer-sized robot, basically, which cooks roughly 100 meals an hour. And we're not only dealing with robotic arms, it's basically a full upper body concept of a body with the arms moving, different cameras and sensors that handle the entire process. And within one system, we have right now embodied everything from the storage and the dispensing of the ingredients, our own AC cooling system, a dishwasher component, right? Doing the dishes is always the most annoying part. So that's also taken care of. The entire handling, order display, up to the take-out trays for the end consumer. So for the end consumer, it's like a simple vending machine process. You approach the robot, you click your button of which meal you want. You can personalize it to your favorite nutrition profile, basically, and get it out in a good 2-3 minutes. That's the core of the hardware. And this whole hardware stack comes with a lot of AI power integrated. We have our own Jetson GPUs in the system. We right now deal with roughly 2,000-3,000 data points per meal that is being cooked and served. So we also get a lot of our own prediction on like waste, overall demand predictions along the entire supply chain, which normally a chef can't really even make use of. So that's really the first time you get to the point of kind of a global nutrition intelligence that we're aiming to build from collecting the data and basically leveraging our robots as data collection devices as much as a Tesla is being leveraged to collect data for autonomous driving. We're doing the same thing to get better with autonomous nutrition. And the whole backbone, which is also a core driver of the business model, is our own Circus OS. That's kind of the third pillar of things, where we have developed an entire operating system that not only powers the robot, but also the recipes, the connections to the wholesalers, procurement of the ingredients, hygiene regulatory tasks that needs to be managed. So all the complexity that also happens in the back of house of a kitchen is also handled through us. So we are kind of a one-stop ecosystem solution and not a robot only, which gives us a very great business model approach where we sell the hardware and it always comes combined with a SaaS solution for the entire AI software. And that's really the high margin driver where we have a margin 90% plus. And like, since we're basically installing infrastructure on ground in your location, it's a very great kind of razor blade model for us to have monthly recurring fees being added to the purchase of the robot. And that's really where our growth comes from.
So that's helpful. I mean, that you touched on the business model as well. I mean, how do you see the mix of, software and hardware, evolving over time?
I mean, it's a bit when you, I mean, it's maybe not the right comparison, but even comparing it to Apple, right? So I have my MacBook, I have my iPhone, but I also have a ton of services, right? I have Apple TV, I have this, I have that, and I mean, there was iTunes back in the days, right? But you have a ton of services and also subscriptions that are being added to the ecosystem, and that's really a similar approach here, where you have a one-off purchase for the hardware, but what we're working on is to build more and more services that are adding to that infrastructure that you have right now installed in your location. One thing being the software, which is right now the core driver, which we're constantly growing. So you're really much locked in. You have to use our software that when you want to use the robot. So we're right now growing more and more in the software sector, offering right now more and more standalone AI products to optimize your prediction, optimize waste, personalized nutrition profiles. We're right now started, for example, to sell licenses for recipes from top creators and chefs, right? So you can get a Jamie Oliver recipe and you just buy a license and suddenly it works as a kind of as an app store platform for recipes. So there's a lot more that is coming, which is all on the services side. So we're growing a lot faster on the software side here and focusing a lot on extending that. So the long-term business growth will always come from software. And even today, or already today, with every additional robot, we're adding roughly 100K in ARR to the business. So it's all about right now scaling the infrastructure. And with that, on an annual basis, we're step by step growing the recurring software revenues.
That's pretty significant given I think your ASP is around 200,000 or so, I think,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
CA1. So yeah, that's pretty material. So I guess it was in May of last year you acquired Fully AI, and I understand that that's basically a agentic capabilities, and that's a really important trend in AI right now. Just you kind of just highlight what capabilities that acquisition adds for you, kind of both now and in the future, and where investors might see the impact first.
Yeah. I mean, there's multiple elements that we already came from on the AI side, which were mainly tied to the robot, right? So we have over 20 different sensors integrated, 5 cameras integrated into the system. So that's where we work with a stack of NVIDIA and are working in very close relationship with NVIDIA, with our own compute integrated in the system. So kind of nano data centers, right, integrated into the machine. So we have no cloud dependency, which gets particularly important in a defense case. So we can like really use our own data to get better in the system with every meal we cook. So from temperature profiles, waste predictions, and so on. That's one element. And what we learned prior to acquiring Fully is that the software became more and more complex, which gets back to the same problem. You don't really have a skilled people or a skilled chef on ground. And if you give the non-skilled person a very complex software, it will be hard for them to manage. So agentic AI solutions here are really the core things. And that's what Fully is really strong at. And we acquired them also with a strong partnership with Meta right now that Fully had been built up or built out over the past years. So today our software is much more agentic, and we are giving the human that interacts with the robot the perfect guidance. We tell the human which ingredients might need to be purchased, when to clean what, have a lot of elements when it comes to predictive maintenance. So the entire ecosystem just becomes more intuitive and proactive rather than you needing to react to the software and clicking through different errors and notifications. So overall, it just makes everything a lot more simple and a lot more intelligent through the data that we're collecting.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So I'm going to talk about kind of the market opportunity for you. It seems like it's kind of bifurcates into commercial and defense kind of broadly. Maybe you can confirm that, but just how do you think about kind of the relative size of those and kind of like prioritizing, those kind of key end markets?
Yeah. I commercial as its own business, and that's where we're coming from when we founded the company, is a $1 trillion market opportunity. There's barely any peers when it comes to AI robotics in that sector, and we see it as a massive opportunity. And this will be one of the largest markets that will be disrupted through AI and robotics. I mean, today you have it's a manual industry, right? So there's a massive shift that is happening right now on the commercial side. And on defense, that's something that we entered right now, roughly 2 years ago. Basically because multiple armed forces called us and said, like, please, we want to have that solution also for our barracks, field camps, shelters, and so on. Because one thing you don't want to do is allocate critical labor in military operations to like preparing a pasta, right? So there's a lot more mission critical tasks that need to be done. And when you look into the structure and the spend profiles of armed forces, roughly 50% of all the costs goes to labor, but that's not combat fighters, that's logistics. The majority of people is logistics. Only a good 20% is really combat fight. The rest is just pure handling of the supply chain and the infrastructure. So what we are seeing right now with all the armed force that we're working with is they're not spending the most money on drones or even like different other weapon systems. They have a really strong need to reinvent their infrastructure because that's completely outdated in most of the cases, which is crazy to see. I mean, with the German armed forces, Ukrainian armed forces, Lithuanian armed forces, all parties we're already working with and we want as trusted clients. They're operating some of their structures like back in Second World War. So autonomous infrastructure really is the core, and that's what we are tackling as the first party ever when it comes to food supply, which is always a very critical one. So we definitely see the opportunity for really tens of thousands of units globally. We're right now starting with selected partners in the European market, and that will right now start to scale over the course of this year.
Yeah, so I think it's a good segue into your new product, the CAM, or relatively newer product, which I guess is a container-based version for military and field applications. Sounds like you got some pretty interesting approvals there, but
Yeah.
How does that product differ from the CA1?
Yeah. So the CA1 is kind of the first product that we're coming from right now, kind of the smaller brother to the CAM. The difference to the CAM is it's designed to also work outdoors. So in any case of like defense field operations, even disaster relief applications, it always makes sense to have something that works outdoors and that is a bit easier to handle when it comes to the logistic structure. So the CA1 tends to be integrated into existing infrastructures, canteen operations, buildings, while the CAM is based on a 20-foot container. So you can basically plug and play it everywhere and just move it by a truck within minutes. And when you look at food supply today, setting up a field kitchen tends to take you around 4 to 5 hours. So there are cases where even the Ukrainian armed forces, they told us once we've set up the overall base camp with a kitchen setup, the mission is already done, right? So it becomes a bit redundant to move around all that equipment on a manual side. So the CAM is something you just put it on the ground and you're ready to serve thousands of people on a daily basis within minutes. So you save a lot of time in combat and you save a lot of manual like resources that you need to allocate. So it really reinvents overall supply structures for soldiers in any kind of scenario.
Very helpful. So, let's go talk about, deployments, ultimately revenue. Just as you go from early rollouts to broad deployment, like what's the hardest part of scaling? Is the manufacturing, installation, customer adoption, like kind of what are the gating factors?
So on the production side, the good thing is we've outsourced that. So we own the entire IP. We own right now a stack of nearly 40 patents on the hardware and AI solutions, which are always combined or in a lot of cases. So we work with a company called Celestica there, a Canadian company with global production resources. So we're not building our own factories and we don't plan to. Right? We own the IP, but we want to make sure we work with the best experts on that side. So scalability is given and can be achieved quite easily. We spent a lot of time on this over the last 2 years to industrialize our hardware, which we achieved last year. built our own first high volume factory, and since then started to produce, and right now steadily ramping up the production capacities. So that really was the hardest thing to achieve over the last years, which we achieved last year. Today, or we thought it is customer adoption. Customer adoption turned out to be the easiest thing. Like, there's always about price and quality, right? When you can guarantee a good meal at a good price, customers are loving it. And that's the case today, which led us to the biggest challenge and growth today, which is always access to the perfect ingredients and the quality assurance, right? So we work with some of the largest wholesalers around the world, and specifically in the European field, even in the military operations case. The problem is these parties are not digital at all. So we have a perfect AI prediction of what ingredient needs to be procured. And at the very end, the wholesaler prints it out, makes notes with a pen, right? So it's a ridiculous process at that end of the supply chain. So we're right now also focusing more and more on developing our own software solutions along the entire supply chain of ingredient procurement, so that we can make sure the ingredients are always at the perfect quality, and we can measure the quality better. So you have a higher input, which always guarantees you better and stronger output of the meal quality around the world. So that's, I would say, the biggest challenge right now, to always make sure that around the world we have the access to the perfect input of the ingredients.
Okay, just a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. So you guys gave some pretty impressive guidance for 2026. It's, I think, 44 to 55 million euros, and that's potentially over 10x growth, depending on what you guys ultimately report for 25. And just kind of like, what gives you confidence in that range, and like, what's the biggest risk to the plan?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the beauty of exponential growth when it comes to deep tech companies and AI companies, right? You have a longer phase of R&D, which we went through right now over roughly 4 years to really get the product right. We shipped the first hardware back in 2021, so like very early in the process. Learned a ton of things over the last years to really get things right, industrialize it with the right partners, build up all the partnerships and the networks. So today is the point, and this year, where we have our first full year of really growth and just rolling out and building up more and more production capacities. So really get a lot of confidence from the thousands of hours over the last years of testing. We sold right now a good roughly 800,000 meals over the past years. So we know our business and we know how it works, and we really build it to perfection over the last years. Which really today gets us to the point where we can just scale technology with confidence. And with right now the 44 to 55 million guidance, that's something that honestly I'm even seeing that on the more conservative spectrum, right? We have the factory which can produce up to 6,000 units per year, so we're not utilizing that to any extent. Celestica has room for us to grow. We have a full order book of over 500 units. We have customers who are calling us because they're waiting. So it's more on us right now to deliver and execute. But the market is ready and the technology is ready as well.
Very helpful. So, last one for me, just kind of zooming out a bit here, just kind of thinking more long term. It's always a fun way to think. As CEO, get out of the weeds. Like, where do you want this company to be in 5 or 10 years, and what impact do you hope it's made by then?
I think today we're very much a product company, right? So we come from that one strong product that is really much standing out, and that's like something really new, and we're creating a new category with bringing full autonomy to an industry that is today manual, and bringing robotics to the industry. And the first thing that we want to achieve is building that infrastructure, right? We want to see millions and millions of these systems around the world. You have hundreds of millions of coffee machines in the world. You have hundreds of millions of vending machines in the world, and our product fits exactly in that spectrum, and it will be a standard product everywhere where you want to go and want to grab a meal. And that not being necessarily a fine dining restaurant, but everywhere else. So that's the first thing we want to achieve. And when we right now look into the mid and long term, it will all be around building an ecosystem, leveraging the data of kind of our small mini factories, so to say, to get better at prediction of demand, of food trends, of waste, right? So we can get better in serving the right things to every human in every case. And it doesn't matter if it's the pasta for a soldier of the German armed forces, or if it's somewhere investment banker in New York, it doesn't matter. We want to serve humans all around the world. And to get best at that, it's all about leveraging the data all along the supply chain. And still, there is no thing as such as a global nutrition intelligence. So it will go all the way up to the farmer, so we can leverage our data to tell the farmer which seed to plant, because we know what the exact demand is on ground across countries, across use cases. So at the very end, it's about reducing food waste, increasing efficiency, and also making food easier to access and available, and also a lot cheaper for end consumers. So it's not only about right now saving on labor costs, but really reinventing the entire food supply chain so you get a high quality meal at a price point that you normally only get a cheeseburger for.
Okay, that's great and very exciting stuff. Did you mention your website? I think you referred to earlier what the website address is.
Yeah, it's circus-group.com. That's where you can find quite some good visuals, insights, videos. It's always great to see the robot in action. We're right now working on the first units in the US, so that will also give some additional visibility on that. Today, for most of the listeners, probably a video needs to do it.
Great. All right, thanks a lot. I'm going to hand it back to our host, Tim.
Thanks, James. Nicholas, just one extemporaneous question before I let you go. So when you're meeting with investors, what do you think they're missing on the story today that you would, in a couple of sentences, help clarify any misperceptions they may have about the story?
I think it's always, I mean, when it comes to AI and robotics in general, right? It's the misconception of how fast growth is really happening. And we've been coming right now from a good 4 year long R&D phase. So when you look at our status quo, we are small when it comes to the revenues. But that's also intended, right? You don't want to scale a new technology too early. That will just lead to bad mistakes, probably of scaling too fast too quickly. And that's something that we have really avoided over the last years. And like when you think about a Anthropic OpenAI 3, 4 years ago, you would have said, it's a pre-revenue company that just doing research. Let's see how that turns out. And today everybody's like, maybe it would have been a good timing to invest or jump into that company, right? So I think the growth curve right now for products like ours, and specifically at Circus, we know that we're ready to scale the technology and that we have something at our hands which customers deeply want and need. So I think what investors don't really get today is how fast that market will change right now, just because the timing for a new technology in food overall and in that industry is long overdue. Minimum wages are increasing every year. Labor is getting less and less. So right now is the point where things will scale quite rapidly. And I think that's something that is sometimes a bit underestimated of how fast these things can really happen. And for us, that moment is right now this year.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time, Nikolas Bullwinkel. Really interesting story. I have to say in closing that it's reminding me a lot of my childhood cartoon favorite of the Jetsons. It feels like we're moving into the Jetsons era real time. So best wishes as you commercialize.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, industry-specific symposiums, and conference schedules. We will see you next time for another edition of the WTR Small Cap Spotlight podcast. Finally, a special thanks to the producer and editor of the podcast, Krista Fitzpatrick.